What if the man who sent the first humans to the moon once built weapons for Hitler? Can a person be both a genius and a monster? What hides behind the smile of the father of spaceflight? Inspiration or blood on his hands? This isn't a story about rockets, but about the price of progress, about how the dream of reaching the stars was born out of the nightmare of war. From underground concentration camps to NASA's launch pads, Wernher von Braun's journey sounds like a Hollywood movie that no studio would dare to film. But it's all true. Today, you'll discover how a Nazi engineer became America's hero and a symbol of space exploration. Wernher von Braun, the man who managed to visit both hell and the moon, literally and figuratively. By day, he was a romantic engineer, dreaming of the stars. By night, an SS officer building rockets for Hitler. If there were an award for the most contradictory biography of the 20th century, he'd win it without leaving the lab. Just imagine. First, von Braun creates a miracle weapon that bombards London and kills thousands. A couple of decades later, his Saturn V rocket sends the first men to the moon, and the whole world applauds. Hollywood couldn't have written a better script. From enemy of humanity to hero of mankind. No trial, no apology, just a wide grin and an American passport. The Americans, of course, decided that talent erases everything. Yes, he's a former Nazi. So what? At least the rockets fly. That was pretty much the unspoken logic of Operation Paperclip, when the US was collecting German scientists like rare Pokémon. And von Braun was the golden catch. Morality? Who needs it when the prize is the cosmos and the Cold War? Von Braun himself seemed to see it all as just a change of scenery. Yesterday, he worked for a dictator with a mustache. Today, for a president with a smile. As long as there was fuel in the tank and liftoff on schedule, everything was fine. In that sense, he was a genius, not just of science, but of self-preservation. He could launch not only rockets, but also his reputation straight into the stratosphere. The irony of fate. The man whose rockets once destroyed cities became the symbol of peaceful space exploration. From the black SS uniform to NASA's white lab coat, von Braun's story proves that if you want to rewrite your biography, just build something that reaches the moon. When other boys in the 1920s were kicking soccer balls or dreaming of being pilots, young Wernher von Braun was already fantasizing about flying to the stars. Only his road to the stars turned out to be rather down to earth. Through the army, and rockets meant not to launch dreams, but to blow up cities. Von Braun started as your typical sci-fi nerd, space books, model rockets, boundless enthusiasm. But he quickly realized dreams don't fly without funding. And who in 1930s Germany was throwing money around like confetti? The army, of course. So Wernher didn't hesitate. From the Society for Space Travel, he switched to the Ministry of Defense of Adolf Hitler. From then on, he built not ships of dreams, but weapons of vengeance. His lab became a factory of death, rather than a launch pad for humanity. Yet, judging by all accounts, von Braun didn't lose much sleep over moral questions. He probably thought, a rocket is a rocket. Doesn't matter if it's headed to space or to London. The important thing is that it flies beautifully and the boss claps. This shift, from moon dreamer to Hitler's engineer, perfectly captured the spirit of the era. One day, you're sketching stars. The next, you're signing a military contract. And to be fair, Wernher never pretended to be a victim of circumstance. He knew exactly where he was and what he was doing. The army paid well, provided resources, and most importantly, let him play with the most powerful toys of the time. In the end, it was in uniform that von Braun learned how to turn fantasies into metal and metal into rockets. Too bad those rockets first flew not toward Mars, but toward people. But honestly, who cared back then? Wernher just wanted to see something finally take off beautifully. Ah, Peenemünde. It sounds almost like a cozy seaside resort where you'd go fishing and sip beer by the Baltic. But no, this was no vacation spot. It was the birthplace of Wernher von Braun's most terrifying toys of the 20th century. Under the cry of gulls and the crash of waves, rockets were born that would soon make London tremble. When Wernher got permission to build his own rocket paradise, he went all in. Forget spas and sunbathing. Peenemünde became a scientist's Disneyland. Instead of hotels, barracks, instead of swimming pools, launch pads. In just a couple of years, the sleepy fishing village turned into a futuristic city of the future, reeking not of sea salt, but of burned kerosene. Von Braun was the maestro of this orchestra of physicists, chemists, and officers. His inspiration came not only from equations, but also from Hollywood-style imagination, especially Fritz Lang's silent film Woman in the Moon. Rumor has it, he borrowed from it the famous countdown, 10, 9, 8, and even slapped the movie's logo onto his real rockets like a fan sticking a band sticker on his laptop. Science, cinema, and militarism, what a cocktail! As long as you don't think too hard about where those rockets were aimed. Naturally, all of this wasn't funded by movie tickets, but by the Reich's military budget. Hitler loved big toys, and von Braun was just the kind of man who could turn a boy's dream of space into a weapon of mass destruction. Ironically, eyewitnesses said the atmosphere was almost romantic. Young geniuses, the smell of fuel, talk of conquering the stars. Only instead of stars, they conquered the ceilings of bunkers. Peenemünde became a showcase of Nazi technological pride, and a symbol of how brilliance and blindness can explode in the same cloud of smoke. The cruel twist? Humanity's road to the moon began right there, on that grim beach resort, straight through hell. If Wernher von Braun had Instagram, his stories would have been tagged just inspired by cinema, because his rockets were born not just from blueprints and math, but from sci-fi fantasies and movie reels. Yes, the great engineer, the future father of American spaceflight, drew his inspiration from director Fritz Lang. Lang's 1929 silent film, Woman in the Moon, became von Braun's unofficial textbook. He didn't just watch it in awe, he stole ideas straight off the screen. The countdown, 10, 9, 8, straight from the movie. The rocket's design, copied. He even stuck the film's logo on his real ballistic missiles, like a fanboy plastering his laptop with stickers from his favorite band. Picture it. In the land of iron discipline and military secrecy, Hitler's chief rocket engineer was guided by a science fiction movie. That's like today's Ministry of Defense designing tanks based on Star Wars. Von Braun wasn't just a technician, he was a romantic with a slide rule. While others obsessed over trajectory and payload, he dreamed of stars and style. His lab must have looked more like a movie set than a weapons facility. Noise, smoke, dramatic explosions, all that was missing was popcorn. Of course, reality hit hard. His sleek, futuristic rockets didn't fly to the moon. They flew to London. And that's where the dark irony kicks in. A man who dreamed of peaceful voyages to the stars ended up building the deadliest weapon of his era. It's almost poetic, the merging of Hollywood dreams and Gestapo nightmares. The kid who wanted to reach the heavens wound up making hell rain down on Earth. If this were a movie, no one would believe it. But this was real life, and von Braun was its most dangerously ambitious director. October 3rd, 1942. the day Wernher von Braun quite literally touched the stars. His A4 rocket, later known as the V2, broke through the edge of space for the very first time. On Earth, applause. In the sky, a trail of smoke. And somewhere between, the birth of a new era. The irony? This wasn't the dawn of exploration, but the test flight of a weapon built for Hitler. Von Braun beamed with pride. His creation soared 85 kilometers high, farther than anything mankind had ever launched. A scientific breakthrough, no doubt. The scientists cheered, while Londoners, well, they hid in basements. The first object to touch space was also the first to make the heavens rain fire. A romantic encounter with the cosmos, featuring death and destruction. When von Braun and his team shouted, "We've reached space!" somewhere Isaac Newton probably rolled in his grave. Science might have triumphed, but morality was buried under rubble. Still, for Wernher, this was a personal victory. He had done what no one else could, launched humanity beyond its cradle, though not exactly in the spirit of peace. Hitler, who'd once dismissed von Braun's toys, suddenly changed his tune. The A4 became his new obsession, renamed the V2, short for Vergeltungswaffe, the weapon of vengeance. And just like that, a boyhood dream of lunar travel was reborn as a Nazi propaganda tool. The cruel truth, on that crisp October day, humanity did indeed reach space for the first time. Not with a brave astronaut, but with a Nazi scientist in a white lab coat. The space age began not with a dream, but with an explosion. And von Braun, he probably smiled, proud that his rocket finally flew, never mind where it landed. If Wernher von Braun ever wrote a self-help book, it would probably be titled "How to Achieve Success While Others Die for Your Ideas." Harsh? Maybe. But that's exactly what the production of his infamous V2 rockets looked like. The so-called miracle weapons of Hitler's dreams. After the British bombed Peenemünde, von Braun didn't miss a beat. He simply moved his operation underground to the Harz Mountains. There, in the cold, damp tunnels of the Mittelwerk complex, he began mass-producing rockets. And who did the hands-on work? Not bright-eyed engineers in crisp lab coats, but emaciated prisoners from the Dora concentration camp. Over 20,000 people died building von Braun's rockets, more than were killed by the rockets themselves. They labored, starved, and died in pitch-black tunnels, literally working to death. And von Braun? He visited the site, saw it all with his own eyes, and kept sketching blueprints. Science requires sacrifice, he might have said, though the sacrifices weren't his to make. Above ground, glowing reports of technical breakthroughs filled the air. Below ground, bodies piled up at the tunnel exits. Every successful launch had a human cost buried beneath it. Quite literally. The symbolism is chilling. Von Braun wanted his rockets to deliver humanity to the stars, but instead, they delivered death to the doorsteps of Europe. His launch pad to the future was built on corpses. Years later, when the world hailed him as a hero of space exploration, few remembered that his first spaceport was a concentration camp. Yes, von Braun knew how to make rockets fly, but compassion? That wasn't part of the design. Wernher von Braun wasn't just an engineer, he was a master of selective blindness, a man who could look straight into hell and see a laboratory. While thousands of prisoners in Mittelwerk were starving and dying under impossible conditions, von Braun, immaculate in his white coat, discussed fuel mixtures and nozzle angles. He knew. Of course he knew. He saw the hollow-eyed prisoners hauling rocket parts through the filth, collapsing where they stood. He walked those tunnels. He smelled the decay. And yet, our visionary kept right on going. because in his mind, that wasn't his department. Death was someone else's responsibility. He was just doing science. If von Braun had had a LinkedIn page, his bio might have read, "Not responsible for personnel management." A clever way to ignore the fact that his personnel were concentration camp inmates replaced as quickly as they perished. He wasn't naive, far from it. By that point, von Braun was an SS officer, a man deeply enmeshed in the Nazi machine. He knew exactly how things worked and who paid the real price for his success. But instead of saying stop, he said, "We need more fuel." Instead of conscience, he had efficiency. History has seen plenty of brilliant minds with dark pasts, but von Braun stands in a league of his own. He gazed at the stars while standing knee-deep in blood, yet somehow managed to maintain the air of a dreamy intellectual. In his mind, forced labor wasn't horror, it was logistics, and that's what makes him so disturbingly fascinating. A man capable of extraordinary genius and extraordinary denial. He truly did reach the heavens, but only by closing his eyes to the hell beneath his rockets. Here's the grim joke of it all. Wernher von Braun's miracle rockets, those sleek symbols of Nazi engineering, had one of the most grotesque statistics in human history. More people died building them than were ever killed by them. Imagine that. It was deadlier to make a V2 than to be hit by one. Von Braun proudly called his creations a triumph of technology. The British called them something else entirely, a nightmare that arrives without warning. The V2 traveled faster than sound, so if you heard it coming, congratulations, you weren't the target. But these so-called weapons of vengeance weren't just terrifying, they were spectacularly useless. Each rocket cost a fortune, flew wherever it pleased, and often exploded on the launch pad before it even got the chance to terrify anyone. Out of roughly 6,000 V2s produced, about 8,000 people were killed by them. Meanwhile, more than 20,000 slaves died constructing them underground. So, statistically speaking, every rocket claimed 3 lives before it ever left the ground. Still, Wernher didn't seem too bothered. To him, this was progress. He'd stand proudly next to a shiny model of his rocket, lecturing about aerodynamics as if it weren't literally assembled by dying hands. And yet, for all its destruction, the V2 was a strategic joke. It drained Nazi resources faster than it terrorized Britain. If there'd been a Nazi accountant in the room, he'd have fainted at the numbers. But von Braun, ever the PR genius, found a way to spin disaster into destiny. Years later, he would call the V2 a stepping stone to the stars. Translation: first, we kill thousands, later, we fly to the moon. A horrifying equation, but one he sold perfectly. Marketing genius, 10/10. Ethics, 0. Imagine a weapon so fast it outruns sound itself, falling from the sky like divine punishment, killing people before they even hear it coming. Sounds like science fiction, right? Well, Wernher von Braun turned that fiction into fact with his masterpiece, the V2 rocket, history's first ballistic missile. Though, if there were a trophy for the most pointless weapon of mass terror, von Braun would have taken home the gold. London in 1944 was pure surrealism. You'd stroll to the bakery, and a second later, the entire street was gone. No sirens, no warning, just instant oblivion. The Nazis even gave the rocket a cute name, Vergeltungswaffe, the weapon of vengeance. Vengeance for what exactly? No one could quite explain. Von Braun probably felt like a rock star. His rockets lit up the sky, just not in a way anyone enjoyed. For him, it was a triumph of science. For Londoners, it was a horror show with no intermission. But here's the kicker. This so-called wonder weapon was a PR stunt disguised as innovation. Sure, it terrified people, but militarily, completely useless. The V2 couldn't change the course of the war. It could barely hit what it was aimed at. Still, it gave Hitler a comforting illusion that Germany still had a shot at victory through technology. Meanwhile, von Braun was quietly jotting down notes for his next project, rockets that might actually reach Mars instead of random postcodes. And that's the bitter irony. The same machine that leveled London was also the first human object to touch space. Death and discovery, horror and hope, all welded into one shiny metal tube. London trembled. Wernher smiled. For him, it wasn't terror, just another test flight. Strictly professional, nothing personal. If the Royal Air Force had a segment called Revenge of the Week, August 1943 would have taken the top spot. That was when the British decided to throw Wernher von Braun and his rocket-obsessed buddies at Peenemünde, the most explosive surprise party in history. Operation Hydra. No invites, no cake, just 1,800 tons of bombs. Von Braun, blissfully asleep, woke up to sirens and chaos as his shiny space paradise turned into a firestorm. The British were determined to end his little science fair once and for all. But as history loves to remind us, when you aim for the bad guy's lab, you mostly hit potato fields and dormitories. The result? A spectacular failure. Sure, a few workshops went up in smoke, a couple of engineers joined the afterlife, but von Braun survived without a scratch. The rocket program, delayed by a mere 7 weeks. 7. The British lost dozens of planes for the equivalent of hitting the snooze button on Hitler's space dream. Strategic brilliance, 0 out of 10. Still, von Braun got the message. His toys were too valuable to sit out in the open, so he gathered his blueprints, his team, and what was left of his conscience, and moved everything underground, literally. Thus was born the infamous Mittelwerk, where thousands of prisoners would be worked to death assembling his rockets in darkness. So, in a twisted way, Operation Hydra worked. It just drove the program deeper into hell. The Allies thought they'd cut off the serpent's head. Instead, it grew new ones in the tunnels beneath the Harz Mountains. They wanted to destroy a weapon of vengeance, and ended up helping create a factory of death. Sometimes history doesn't just repeat itself, it mocks you while doing it. When the smoke of World War II finally cleared, the world discovered a surreal twist. The losers were in ruins, but their scientists were packing for America. And leading that one-way trip from the ashes of the Reich? None other than Wernher von Braun, Hitler's favorite rocket man turned surprise US import. The Americans had realized something simple and slightly terrifying. Whoever gets von Braun gets the future. Morals, optional. Justice, negotiable. Thus began Operation Paperclip, or more honestly, Adopt a Nazi Scientist. Washington collected German engineers like rare vinyls. This one's slightly used, may have some stains, but hey, he still runs. And von Braun, master of reinvention, didn't miss a beat. He smiled, handed over the V2 blueprints, tucked his SS photos somewhere deep in his suitcase, and said, "I was only dreaming of space." Boom. Instant amnesty. No trial. No questions about the thousands who died building his rockets. Just a brand new job and a first-class ticket to New Mexico. While Nuremberg tried war criminals, von Braun was sipping coffee in the desert, explaining to the Pentagon how to make a rocket fly higher and fall farther. The irony could have powered a Saturn V. He quickly became Mr. Braun from Huntsville, respectable, brilliant, and now officially American. The past, lost in translation. It's one of those moments where history feels like dark comedy. While some Nazis swung from gallows, others got lab coats, paychecks, and the American dream. Wernher von Braun didn't just survive history, he hacked it. He turned from war criminal to national treasure faster than a V2 off the launch pad. From the rubble of the Reich straight into NASA's front door, the most successful career pivot of the 20th century. Wernher von Braun wasn't just good at launching rockets, he was a genius at relaunching himself. Yesterday's SS officer and Hitler's golden boy became today's clean-cut American family man, complete with a Bible, a white picket fence, and a smile fit for the cover of Life magazine. From swastika to stars and stripes, one small step for Wernher, one giant leap for public relations. Settling in cozy Huntsville, Alabama, von Braun quickly figured out the formula for American success: smart, polite, and above all, wholesome. So he married his cousin. Family values, right? Had 3 kids and perfected the image of a respectable church-going engineer. Sundays were for God, weekdays for rockets, all with that endearing German accent he never quite managed to lose. To seal the transformation, he found Jesus. The same man who once worked for Himmler now spoke passionately about divine purpose, morality, and man's destiny among the stars. Back in Germany, he'd quoted Faust. Now, he quoted the gospel. But hey, new country, new script. And who in post-war America was going to question a white Christian engineer promising to conquer the heavens? His reinvention was flawless. Pure Hollywood. Black SS uniform replaced by a white lab coat. Marching songs swapped for church hymns. The Nazi eagle traded for the NASA logo. Von Braun knew better than anyone that optics matter. And it worked. By the 1950s, he was America's rocket genius. No one mentioned Dora or the dead. Just a charming, visionary professor teaching kids to dream about space. He scrubbed his past cleaner than a NASA control panel. But here's the thing. No matter how bright his halo looked, some stains don't wash out, even in the land of second chances. If Wernher von Braun had a YouTube channel, it would have been called From V2 to NASA, How to Build a Career Without Ever Leaving the Lab. After arriving in the US, he realized something brilliant. Sure, World War II was over, but the next one, the Cold War, was just getting started. And rockets? Oh, they were suddenly very in again. He kicked things off with the Redstone missile, basically a V2 with a shiny American flag and a nuclear payload. Yesterday, his rockets terrified London. Today, they were aimed at Moscow. The moral of the story: if you're going to build weapons, make sure you're building them for the winners. But von Braun wasn't content to just scare people. He wanted to inspire them too. When he wasn't plotting trajectories for nuclear warheads, he was writing books and magazine features about space exploration, promising Americans a new era for mankind. And miraculously, it worked. Suddenly, kids across the country were dreaming of becoming astronauts instead of cowboys. Then, boom, 1957. The Soviets launched Sputnik, the first satellite in orbit. Panic spread faster than a rocket launch. Congress freaked out, the Pentagon lost its cool, and there was von Braun in the corner, calmly saying, "Told you so." 4 months later, he fired back with Explorer 1, America's first satellite, and overnight, the ex-Nazi became a national hero. Soon, he was everywhere, on TV, in documentaries, even in classrooms. The man who once built weapons of vengeance was now selling hope, smiling for the cameras, and explaining space travel like a friendly science teacher. He'd done it again, the ultimate rebrand. From the dark tunnels of Mittelwerk to the bright studios of Disney. Wernher von Braun, the man who turned rockets of war into rockets of wonder. and never looked back. 1961. America's drinking coffee, dancing to Elvis, and then boom, the Soviets drop a cosmic bombshell. Yuri Gagarin just flew to space, the first man ever. Cue national panic, politicians sweating, generals pacing, journalists gasping. And somewhere in Alabama, Wernher von Braun adjusts his tie, smiles, and thinks, finally, my moment. President John F. Kennedy, flashing that toothpaste commercial grin, stood before the nation and made a promise for the ages. We choose to go to the moon. But behind that shining rhetoric stood a man who once swore allegiance to Hitler. Yep, America's ticket to lunar glory had a swastika in its resume. History, you sly devil. Von Braun got to work. If he was going to shoot for the moon, he'd make it look good. Under his direction, engineers built the Saturn V, a skyscraper-sized beast of a rocket, powerful enough to send not just astronauts, but probably an entire orchestra into orbit. It was part science, part theater, and all von Braun. In press photos, he looked like a saint of science. White lab coat, calm smile, the perfect poster boy for the space age. Nobody mentioned that his first rockets had different destinations and much darker origins. Now, instead of spreading terror, his rockets carried hope and a good helping of American pride. Irony of ironies. Von Braun once worked to prove Germany's superiority, and now he was doing the same for the US. The logos changed. The mission stayed the same. But oh, how the world loved it. The cameras, the countdowns, the glory. It was space opera at its finest. And like any great production, it needed a star. Wernher von Braun didn't just build rockets. He built the legend of the man who made the impossible possible. A genius, a sinner, a showman, and America's most complicated hero. July 20th, 1969. On millions of flickering TV screens, Neil Armstrong takes his famous small step for man. In the control room, somewhere in the crowd of engineers, sits Wernher von Braun, the man who just took a giant leap for his reputation. The world celebrates humanity's triumph. Von Braun celebrates his absolution. His Saturn V rocket, a 36-story tower of fire and thunder, had done what no weapon ever could: unite the planet in awe instead of fear. It roared, it soared, it didn't kill a soul. A clean, beautiful, photogenic kind of history. America wept with pride. The newspapers hailed him a hero. And von Braun, the XSS man turned NASA icon, stood smiling in his immaculate white coat, haloed by television lights. But history has a long memory. While the world gazed at the moon, deep in archives lay the photos of von Braun in his black uniform, and in the Harz Mountains, the tunnels of Mittelwerk still whispered with the ghosts of those who died building his dream. Nobody mentioned them on live TV, too much of a buzzkill for a moon party. Von Braun lived out his final years as an American celebrity scientist. Medals, awards, honorary degrees, even a lunar crater named after him. He died comfortably at 65, remembered not as a war criminal, but as the father of space exploration. No trial, no apology, not even a hint of remorse. Just a spotless biography, polished like the surface of the moon his rockets reached. And that's von Braun's ultimate paradox. He did help humanity reach the stars, but only by climbing over shadows. His rockets carried men to the heavens, but their foundations were built on bones. The road to the moon, it turns out, wasn't paved with gold. It was paved with ghosts.